During the early half of the last century, scientists began to recognize that the fossilized bones and shells found in quarries and rock formations were the remains of prehistoric animals. Among these fossil remains were found the huge bones and teeth of what seemed to be gigantic lizards. And indeed, after more finds, more study, and much debate, it was accepted among scientists that giant reptiles, first called dinosaurs by the English anatomist Richard Owen, had once roamed the face of the earth. If we traveled back to the world of the dinosaurs, to that time called the Age of Reptiles, we would see a world very different from the one we know today. The dinosaurs ruled the earth for more than 120 million years during the era called the Mesozoic Era, meaning the middle period of the Earth's history. The Mesozoic Era lasted from 225 million years ago until about 64 million years ago. The Mesozoic is further divided into three smaller time segments called periods. The first period of the Mesozoic Era is known as the Triassic. The second is called the Jurassic, and the third, the Cretaceous. These three periods, each of which lasted millions of years, are important to understanding that the many kinds of dinosaurs did not all live at the same time. During the late Triassic period, one of the earliest dinosaurs was an animal called Coelophysis. A meat-eater, Coelophysis probably walked on its hind legs and fed upon the abundant lizard-like reptiles that then inhabited the earth. Coelophysis grew to about 3 meters long and weighed 18 to 23 kilograms. Compared here in size to a human form, Coelophysis is a relatively small dinosaur. A relative of Coelophysis that lived several millions of years later during the Jurassic period is called Compsognathus. Compsognathus was also bipedal. That is, it walked mainly on its two back legs and was even smaller, growing no bigger than an ordinary chicken. Compsognathus probably fed on insects and small mammals, using its long legs to run down its prey. Bipedality was a characteristic common to many dinosaurs and is a trait not shared by modern reptiles. A more fundamental difference between dinosaurs and modern reptiles can be seen in how the legs are attached to the body. Most reptiles have legs held out from the sides of their bodies in a kind of sprawling position. But dinosaurs' legs were tucked in beneath the body, giving them an upright posture. This allowed dinosaurs to move efficiently and in some cases quickly, and it made it possible for some of them to attain enormous size. Another dinosaur of the late Triassic period, living at the same time as Coelophysis, is called Plateosaurus. This plant-eating animal grew to a length of 8 meters. Plateosaurus could probably stand as well on its hind legs as on all fours, allowing it to reach to the tops of trees for food. During the Jurassic period, a relative of Plateosaurus evolved into what has become the best known of the dinosaurs, Apatosaurus, or as it used to be called, Brontosaurus. The Apatosaurus could reach a length of 21 meters and weigh as much as 30 tons. Apatosaurus must have eaten continuously to support such a massive body, probably feeding on the leaves of tall trees and on the vegetation growing around lakes and marshes. Here, compared to its more ancient relative, Plateosaurus, and to a human form, Apatosaurus can be seen as a true giant. But Apatosaurus was not the largest of the dinosaurs. Brachiosaurus, a relative of Apatosaurus that also lived during the late Jurassic and early Cretaceous periods, reached a length of 23 meters and weighed 77 tons, more than twice as much as Apatosaurus. But fossil remains of an even larger dinosaur have been found. The neck and shoulder bones of 2 dinosaurs found in western Colorado suggest an animal that stood 17 meters tall with a full body length of some 25 meters. This giant has been called Supersaurus. And yet, a dinosaur called Ultrasaurus seems to have been even larger. The remains of this dinosaur suggest an animal in excess of 30 meters long that may have weighed as much as 130 tons. If alive today, Ultrasaurus would be able to look over the top of a 5-story building. Fossil records indicate that there were actually 2 distinct biological orders of dinosaurs. The animals discussed so far, like Apatosaurus and Coelophysis, are animals grouped as Saurischia, or reptile-hipped dinosaurs. As we have seen, some of the reptile-hipped dinosaurs were carnivores, meat-eaters. The other order is the Ornithischia, or bird-hipped dinosaurs. All of the bird-hipped dinosaurs, like the ones shown here, were herbivores, plant-eaters. The names of the 2 groups, bird-hipped and reptile-hipped, are based on differences in the bone structure of the hip or pelvic region. The bird-hipped dinosaur called Iguanodon is interesting because its fossilized bones were the first recognized as coming from ancient reptile-like animals. Iguanodon was plentiful in much of Europe toward the beginning of the Cretaceous period, some 125 million years ago. Remains of Iguanodon are frequently found in groups, suggesting that these plant-eating giants traveled in herds, like modern-day elephants. The Iguanodons had large spiked thumbs that may have been used as a defensive weapon in case of attack from carnivores. Another group of bird-hipped dinosaurs that probably lived in groups were the Creteaceous, or crested dinosaurs. These animals were members of a subgroup of dinosaurs called duck-billed because of their flat, bony, beak-like mouths. An even more startling crest was found on another variety of duck-billed dinosaur called Parasaurolophus. This species survived until the end of the Cretaceous period, only to perish along with the rest of the dinosaurs during what has been called the Great Dying. A remarkable fossil find in western Montana in 1978 indicates that myosaurs, another form of the duck-billed dinosaurs, laid their eggs and cared for their young in communal nesting sites. The reasons for herding and communal nesting were probably defensive. Because if the plant-eaters were large at the end of the Cretaceous period, so were the meat-eaters. Tyrannosaurus rex measured up to 15 meters long, the largest of the carnivorous reptile-hipped dinosaurs. Using its massive head, strong jaws, and dagger-like teeth, the Tyrannosaurus was probably a fearfully efficient predator. Tyrannosaurus rex means king of the tyrant reptiles. And during much of the late Cretaceous period, this fearsome beast must have terrorized the more tranquil plant-eaters. But many of the late Cretaceous plant-eaters developed other defenses against the ferocious predators. Protoceratops, which measured only 2 meters long, was one of the earliest of the horned-faced or ceratopian dinosaurs. The ceratopians seem to have lived only toward the end of the later Cretaceous period, but at that time became quite abundant. Triceratops is probably the most famous of the ceratopian dinosaurs. A plant-eater, Triceratops must have been something like a massive 9-meter-long, 6-ton tank. With its 3 horns and its habit of living in groups, the Triceratops was probably a combative match for even the fiercest of tyrannosaurs. For more than 120 million years, these dinosaurs and many others, some like them and others even stranger in appearance, ruled the earth. What we know of the dinosaurs is based on scientific examination of their fossil remains. Much about their behavior, their coloration, the workings of their bodies, and their final disappearance from the earth may never be known. But the study of their lives and deaths has provided a rich field for scientific theory and debate. Not long ago, some scientists put forward the notion that dinosaurs were not cold-blooded or ectothermic at all, but perhaps warm-blooded or endothermic, that is, capable of regulating their internal body temperatures like birds and mammals do. These scientists argue that the bone structure of many dinosaurs suggests a continuously active life, more like the lives of warm-blooded animals than like the relatively sluggish lives of most cold-blooded reptiles. Another recently debated theory suggests that birds are direct descendants of dinosaurs. The fossil remains of the remarkable feathered animal Archaeopteryx show that it shares over 20 features in common with certain kinds of dinosaurs. Could it be that Archaeopteryx was a feathered, flying, direct descendant of dinosaurs, and that its descendants, the birds, survived the great extinction of the other dinosaurs? Could it be that even today descendants of dinosaurs live on in the form of pigeons, sparrows, robins, and seagulls? These are just a few of the questions in the modern study of dinosaurs. The greatest mystery, however, remains. Why, after over 120 million years of successful evolution, did the dinosaurs, at least in their best-known forms, disappear from the face of the earth? The dinosaurs were not alone in the great dying at the end of the Cretaceous period. Other forms of life, like the flying Pterosaurs, the sea-going Plesiosaurs and Ichthyosaurs, and even a form of microscopic plankton, became extinct at this time. In their search for an explanation, many scientists believe that a long but continuous change in climate finally led to the extinction of these life forms. They point to indications from the geologic record that the plant life of the Earth gradually changed during the last part of the Cretaceous period. Perhaps the climate became very cold and typical food sources became more scarce, and various of the plant-eating dinosaurs began to die out. If the plant eaters died, so would the great predators like Tyrannosaurus. Other scientists, based on their reading of the geologic data, argue that the mass extinction of this period was more abrupt. An intriguing discovery of a layer of a certain mineral-laced deposit that seems to coincide with the period of the Great Dying has suggested a cosmic explanation. Perhaps this deposit is the result of a comet or an asteroid striking the Earth and raising great clouds of dust and steam into the upper atmosphere. If this had happened, the resulting cloud would have blocked out all or most of the sun's light for months on end. Without light, plants and then animal species, especially the large and specialized species like the dinosaurs, would have died out in catastrophic numbers. In any event, 64 million years ago, a great change happened to the Earth and its inhabitants. The dinosaurs vanished. But during that time period, the ancestors of crocodiles, turtles, birds, and most importantly for us, mammals survived, bringing a new order to life on this planet. Perhaps the only evolutionary achievement that ranks in the same class with the emergence of fish from ancient waters to become the first land-dwelling vertebrates is the attainment by some animals of independently powered flight. Some 180 million years ago, during the Jurassic period, many varieties of tropical plants, ferns, evergreens, palms, flourished in the warm, humid environment of ancient lagoons and swamps. It is here that we would have found many examples of the first great flyers, winged insects, like this giant dragonfly called Meganeura, swarmed above the marshy earth in search of food. One of the largest insects ever to live, Meganeura's wingspan measured up to 72 centimeters across. As large as a modern crow or pigeon, Meganeura was nevertheless small in comparison to other flyers of the Jurassic period. Gliding high above the marshes and lagoons could be found the pterosaurs. Pterosaur means winged lizard, and to the modern eye, these flying reptiles would have seemed strange indeed. Pterosaurs glided through the air on wings of thin, leathery skin, wings that look more like those of modern bats than those of modern birds. Among the pterosaurs, there were two great groups, the long-tailed and the short-tailed. During the late Jurassic, the most common of the long-tailed flyers was probably Rhamphorhynchus. Sporting a thick tail ending in a diamond-shaped flap, Rhamphorhynchus more than likely used its tail as a rudder for steering during flight. The size of a crow or a hawk with a 60-centimeter wingspan, Rhamphorhynchus had a long pointed skull and a jaw full of teeth. The wings of this pterosaur were stretched between the creature's body and a long outer finger on each of its forelimbs or hands. The other three fingers, as well as the toes, were clawed. Rhamphorhynchus may have used its claws to grasp and scale trees. Climbing to the upper branches, the pterosaur could then have leapt off to glide through the air. Fossil remains suggest that Rhamphorhynchus lived mainly along the shores of warm inland seas and lagoons. These animals may well have rested during the heat of the day, saving their energy for hunting in the twilight hours. As nightfall approached, the creature would begin its gliding search for food. Rhamphorhynchus probably flew just over the surface of the water, scanning with its relatively large eyes until it spotted a fish lingering near. Then, with its long, pointed, toothy snout, the pterosaur would swoop down and snatch up its prey. There were also various short-tailed pterosaurs flying above the Jurassic lagoons. Some were the size of Rhamphorhynchus, while others were no larger than modern sparrows. Pterodactylus is quite different in shape from Rhamphorhynchus. Its head is longer, and it has fewer and smaller teeth. The long tail is gone, and the wings are broader and shorter. The features of Pterodactylus are common to most of the later pterosaurs. Living along the shores of lagoons, Pterodactylus, like Rhamphorhynchus, was probably also a fish-eater. The Pterodactylus design was evidently very successful, and there were several different species. There are indications that some forms may have lived within wooded areas, probably using their claws to reach to the heights of the great trees. From this vantage point, the Pterodactylus could have spotted flying insects. Flying down from the trees, something like a modern bat, Pterodactylus was probably able to capture insects like Meganeura in midair. The fossil remains suggest that Pterodactylus was ill-suited to upright walking or perching, and it is possible that the pterosaur also rested and slept in the manner of modern bats, grasping tree branches with the claws of its hind legs and hanging upside down. Although long-tailed pterosaurs survived for millions of years during the Jurassic period, they gave way to the short-tailed pterosaurs during the Cretaceous. The pterosaurs of the late Cretaceous period were all short-tailed. One of them that stands out in fossil remains is Pteranodon. Structurally very much like the smaller Pterodactylus, Pteranodon had an elongated skull and a completely toothless beak. Pteranodon was one of the largest of the pterosaurs, with a wingspan of up to 8 meters. Its bony crest was probably a counterbalance for its long beak when fishing. Scientists disagree about how well Pteranodon could fly. Most believe that the huge reptile was predominantly a glider, depending on wind currents to lift it in the air. Like other pterosaurs, Pteranodon probably fed by plucking fish from the surface waters of the ancient seas. Like modern pelicans, Pteranodon had a pouch of skin between the lower jaws. This may have been used to store fish, and it is possible that Pteranodon used this pouch to carry food to its young. By the time the Cretaceous period was drawing to a close, the pterosaurs, like the dinosaurs and seagoing reptiles, had become extinct. Although some scientists have proposed that pterosaurs may have been to some extent warm-blooded and even covered with mammal-like fur, most classify them with the cold-blooded reptiles. Pterosaurs were a group unto themselves and not directly related either to modern bats or birds. During the Jurassic, however, the direct ancestor of birds was developing alongside the pterosaurs. Archaeopteryx is such a fine example of an evolutionary link between birds and reptiles that scientists have argued over whether it is really a reptile or a bird. Archaeopteryx was a little larger than a pigeon, and like a bird was covered with feathers. The head had a long, narrow snout, and the jaws were lined with small teeth. The feathered tail was long and bony like that of a reptile, while the eyes and brain were relatively large, both bird-like characteristics. The wings of Archaeopteryx had 3 clawed fingers, which may have been used to climb trees. Archaeopteryx may have climbed in order to hide from enemies, feed on leaves and insects, and nest. There would have been less competition and less danger in the trees than on the ground. There is some dispute as to just how good a flyer Archaeopteryx may have been. Some believe that the primitive bird was only able to glide from tree to tree or from tree to ground, while others assert that the anatomical evidence is overwhelming that Archaeopteryx was not only capable of flight, but did it rather well, even able to take off from the ground. Archaeopteryx has thus provided scientists with the most significant example of an animal at or near the transition between flightlessness and flight, stimulating various theoretical debates on how the ability to fly arises. Some scientists theorize that the ancestors of Archaeopteryx were fast-running dinosaurs that used their front limbs to help them lunge and leap after prey. Over great expanses of time, the front limbs would have developed feathers from scales and muscle enough to allow the animal to attain the lift and thrust required for independent flight. The competing theory cites modern gliding animals like flying squirrels as examples of animals that may best indicate how primitive birds evolved toward flight. Over great expanses of time, animals that had developed the ability to glide would have slowly attained the structures that will allow them to flap their wings and fly. In any case, during the Cretaceous period, many toothed, feathered, flying creatures appeared on Earth. Ichthyornis seems to have been a competent flyer that was constructed like many of today's birds, except, of course, for the teeth. Ichthyornis had well-developed wings and was about the size of a modern seagull. Ichthyornis probably flew over the inland waters of Kansas, hunting for fish. The fossil remains of the Pterosaurs and Archaeopteryx have provided scientists with great insight into how different animals have developed the power of flight. This fascinating ability is now the domain of history's most capable flyers, the evolutionary heirs of Archaeopteryx, and perhaps the only surviving descendants of the dinosaurs, the modern birds. During the 120 million year period that dinosaurs ruled the earth, small furry creatures, no larger than the modern rat and similar in appearance to the modern shrew, evolved from a line of earlier reptiles. Living in the shadow of the great dinosaurs, these seemingly unimportant little creatures were the ancestors of modern mammals. After the extinction of the dinosaurs, these early mammals came into their own. During the Cenozoic Era, the modern geologic era often called the Age of Mammals, They became the dominant form of life on Earth. Mammals are characterized by several adaptations which have served them well over the last 65 million years. With few exceptions, mammals give live birth to their young. Without exception, the young stay with their mother for a period of time, nourished by her milk and protected by her from enemies. Mammals, unlike fish, amphibians, and reptiles, but like birds, are endothermic. They regulate their own body temperature and therefore can live in environments that would slow or even kill reptiles. The mammalian bone structure allows for fast and continuous action, and the structure of the teeth and jaws allows for the consumption of a great diversity of food. Some 50 million years ago, an animal no bigger than a fox lived in North American and European forests. Hydrocotherium, or Eohippus, is the first known horse. Few animals have left a more complete fossil record than the horses. Here, 6 evolutionary forms of the horse have been placed together for comparison. These very different yet very similar animals developed over a 50 million year period. The modern horse, Equus, illustrated on the right, evolved about 2 million years ago. Among the plant-eating relatives of the horse can be found some of the oddest-looking forms of prehistoric mammals. Brontotherium was between a modern elephant and rhinoceros in size and lived on the open plains of North America about 36 million years ago. Browsing on soft leaves, Brontotherium stood 2.5 meters at its shoulders and weighed more than 5 tons. Its Y-shaped horns were probably used in tests of strength between the males and to ward off attacking creodonts. But even more massive than Brontotherium was Paraceratherium, an ancestral relative of the modern rhinoceros. Paraceratherium existed up to 20 million years ago and stood 5.5 meters high, the largest land mammal ever to live. A human form has been added to this illustration for purposes of size comparison. About 1 million years ago, there began a series of great climatic changes. From the north, tremendous glaciers began to slowly creep southward. The great glaciers descended 4 times, and 4 times North America, Europe, and Asia became regions of polar frigidity. The glaciers locked up available moisture, causing great decreases in the amounts of water in the seas and oceans. During this period, land bridges connected not only North and South America, but North America and Asia as well. Accompanying these great environmental changes were great migrations of the ancestors of modern mammals. Woolly mammoths, relatives of the modern elephant, crossed the Bering Land Bridge from Asia to North America. Another occurrence during this period was the appearance of a primate that seems unique in its evolutionary history. Primitive Homo sapiens, human beings, began to appear in the fossil record some 300,000 to 400,000 years ago. By about 125,000 years ago, the brain size of humans was basically the same as it is today, with the appearance of Neanderthal man. A little more than 50,000 years ago, fully modern human beings had appeared. These humans, called Cro-Magnons, have left cave paintings of the animals that inhabited their world: the woolly mammoth, the bison, the horse. Using their intelligence, early humans set traps and made tools by which they could overcome the brute strength of the large animals of the Ice Age, claiming their great carcasses for food and their great furry coats for clothing. About 10,000 years ago, the glaciers retreated to their present Arctic limits. During this time, there was a relatively sudden, widespread extinction of most of the large mammals. As with the great dying of the dinosaurs, scientists can only guess at what caused these mass extinctions. Claiming supremacy in the modern era were the great cats, the wolves and bears. the African and Indian elephants, and above all, the human beings. The wonders and mysteries of animal life before the historical era have inspired the dedication, the imaginations, and labors of human beings for more than 2 centuries. In seeking to understand the realities of prehistoric life as suggested by the fossil record, we pursue that most human of endeavors, the attempt to better understand ourselves.